Well, everyone, it's finally done. 13 AIOs testing across Intel and AMD platforms, gaming and full core workload results. Not only that, every single one of the results that you're going to see in this video is the result of 3 separate mounts. We also have fan normalized and decibel normalized testing and a bunch of other things. In the end, it was over 150,000 data points spread throughout multiple months of testing. But it's finally done, and I would like to think of this as probably the most comprehensive 360mm AIO roundup that at least I've ever seen. And one of the primary goals here was to cast a pretty wide pricing net. So we've got plenty of coolers here that typically cost $100 or less. And actually a few of these go for less than some high-end air coolers these days. And I'm sure some of these prices might be pretty surprising too, like the amazing looking M25 G2 hitting $100 or even less with rebates. And in a lot of situations, sales will bring prices even lower, like the FX360 Pro and Thermalright Frozen Edge can sometimes be found for under $50. There's also a few here that hover just over that $100 mark. Generally, AIOs in this price range will add more flashy RGB elements or special features not seen in those lower end models. But we also needed to cover what is basically the bleeding edge designs here. That's the extreme end with a new generation of AIOs that incorporate LCD screens, and that tends to push their costs way beyond what's affordable for most people. Still though, I think it's important to have them here since there's always going to be buyers who are willing to pay more for something that makes their build look all that much more personalized. Now look, there's no way to incorporate every single all-in-one liquid cooler, especially in such a broad market, into a video like this. So admittedly, there's probably going to be some that a lot of you guys wanted to see that aren't actually here. But if anything, we've shown that we're open to your feedback. So if you want us to show any of the products that you might have wanted to see, please hit up the comments below. Not only that, if you actually want to buy some of these through our affiliate links and support the channel and support content like this, all of those links will be in the description down below. So the Arctic Liquid Freezer 3 Pro is probably one of the most requested AIOs we have here, and that sort of makes sense. When we covered the original LF3, it became the best price to performance cooler we tested up to that point. And the Pro version, well, it seems to take everything we loved about that one and steps it up a notch. There's the new P12 Pro fans that are supposed to be an upgrade over the legendary P12 Max and way better than the standard P12s on the original Liquid Freezer 3. Arctic has also added an Intel offset bracket optimized for Arrow Lake processors and a slightly revised PWM sensing rate for more linear RPM responsiveness to the fans and the pump. One of the newer coolers here is the ASUS Prime LC360, and at a first glance, it's sort of like a Me Too AIO that's not really meant to do anything new or groundbreaking, but instead it does everything from performance to RGB really well at a relatively affordable price. Basically, ASUS wanted to make an AIO for people who buy their Prime series of cases or motherboards, so there's a pretty strong unified design language going on here. The pump head also needs a bit of a call out since ASUS uses interchangeable caps to modify the way it looks. You can either go with the branded ones or just leave it without anything at all, and it still looks pretty decent in my opinion. The ROG Ryujin 3 Extreme, meanwhile, is the absolute pinnacle of modern AIO design, or at least that's what the ROG group would like you to believe. Basically throwing everything, including the kitchen sink, at a single product. Of course, the 3.5-inch IPS screen is the main in-your-face highlight, but below that is an integrated VRM fan and Asetek's latest Gen 8 V2 pump. Meanwhile, the radiator is slightly thicker than normal and it's capped by ROG's latest flagship fans. This thing's also tied for the title of the most expensive AIO we've ever tested at an absolutely eye-watering $350. And for anyone keeping track at home, it's over $600 here in Canada. And by popular demand, we're actually including a Cooler Master product here, the Master Liquid Atmos Stealth, which from a performance standpoint, this version actually sits above the outgoing Atmos RGB and newer Atmos 2 by using a trio of Cooler Master's best fans, the Mobius 120, and a slightly modified radiator design. So this is their flagship AIO right now. It also completely gives up RGB lighting to instead focus on delivering the best possible noise to cooling ratio. One other thing that I don't think is called out quite enough about the Atmos series is its customizability outside of lighting. design. The cap over the pump head can be completely removed and replaced with a 3D printable design. Cooler Master even has a ton of community-generated, downloadable designs ready to go on their printables page. Corsair, they've got a cooler here too, and I know they've been disappointing us for the last few years in these roundups, but the Nautilus RS marks a very different back-to-basics approach for them, and I happen to love it. This is one of only a few coolers that's available without any RGB whatsoever, which allows it to become one of the more affordable AIOs in this roundup. And when was the last time you heard about anything from Corsair being one of the more affordable things in a lineup? And if you want to spend a bit more, there's also an RGB version, but where it doesn't skimp is on specs. Basically, the RS series represents the starting point for a complete ground-up redesign of Corsair's all-in-one liquid cooler lineup. There's a new high-flow, low-noise pump, a contact plate that's been further optimized for AMD processors, and a revised radiator design that's meant to promote quicker heat dissipation than before. But it's the new RS 120 fans that give this cooler its name, and that makes sense given they're some of the best Corsair has ever produced. I also wanted to give a new kid on the block a try in this video. So meet the Endorfy Navis F360, a cooler that stays true to Endorfy's extreme focus on optimized performance at low decibel levels. The F360 seems to epitomize Endorfy's silence first approach too. There's a pump which uses a custom ceramic bearing design which allows it to run at the lowest RPM levels here without reducing its flow rate. Meanwhile, the radiator uses one of the densest fin setups I've seen on an AIO, and that has been specifically designed around the capabilities of Endorfy's Fluctus fans, and those things are pretty unique too. The sawtooth pattern is supposed to reduce back pressure, which typically causes a noise increase when fans are installed on a radiator. ID Cooling, meanwhile, is one of only a few companies that truly focus on bringing the price of great cooling down to a more affordable level. In this case, we're covering two of their newest AIOs, the FX360 INF and the FX360 Pro, two coolers with almost identical names but slightly different performance targets. Anyways, the real highlight of the show for the FX360 INF is what you get for less than $100. Actually, it's pretty remarkable. There's the lowest profile water block in this whole roundup at just 50 millimeters, and that's capped by a halo ring and infinity mirror RGB with an outline of ID Cooling's logo. The pump is a pretty basic affair that uses a ceramic bearing for increased longevity, and the fans have pretty decent specs overall, but they aren't going to set any performance records. And speaking of fans, that's where the FX360 Pro really distinguishes itself and why I feel it needs to be treated separately. These ones run 200 RPM slower than the ones on the INF, but also push quite a bit more air, which yes, also causes them being quite a bit louder on paper. Also, RGB has been completely yanked from this cooler, giving it a much more understated look. Moving on to Lian, and despite them having a ton of different models out there, we lean towards affordability with the, wait for it, it's a mouthful, GA2 Lite 360 Performance. Now there's a lot to deconstruct about that name. First of all, it's a light version, so there's only basic RGB elements here, and you won't need Lian's finicky L-Connect software to run it. These run on 4-pin fan and 5-volt RGB headers. Nothing fancy here. It's not all cut down though. You get seamlessly pre-installed fans, a great looking pump head, and 28mm thick fans that are optimized for static pressure. Another cooler that has silence, simplicity, and affordability as its top 3 priorities is the Montech HyperFlow Silent. It ditches RGB while being available in both black and white versions. There's a slightly more expensive ARGB version too. The one thing that struck me was how premium this cooler felt, especially when you consider its price of about $80. Its pump head felt solid, and I'd put the quality of the fans right up there with the likes of Phanteks and Lian, not like some of the other flimsy designs here. It feels like a weapon, and I've come to appreciate that after fumbling around with a bunch of these lower quality liquid coolers for the last couple of months or so. There's also a few key differences between the RGB version and this one. First of all, the pump has seen a bit of an evolution with some additional sound deadening being added and slightly modified flow rates. The fans themselves have also been changed to the top level Metal Pro S instead of the standard Metal Pros, and that means better overall performance throughout the RPM range, while on average running quieter too. Moving on to Phanteks, and we're focusing on their new Glacier 1 M25 G2, since it seems they've unfortunately quietly discontinued the epic T30 based all-in-one liquid coolers. Either way, this is an AIO that strives to delicately balance looks with extreme performance and pricing in a number of ways. Let's start with the water block, which is the only one here to integrate a VRM cooling fan while sticking to just under 70 millimeters. Under that is an ASUS Gen 8 pump with a few modifications that allow it to run up to 3,100 RPM instead of topping out around the traditional 2,600. But the real star of the show here are the M25 G2 fans, which are arguably some of the best looking on the market today considering their price. The RGB elements are just so well integrated, and the channeled approach for cable routing along with the rubber screw caps make the whole thing look infinitely more elegant than some of the others here. The fans also take some learnings from the T30 and D30 playbooks, with slightly increased thickness at 30 millimeters for enhanced airflow and static pressure. Back when it launched, the TRYX Panorama made some pretty big waves since it was one of the first to incorporate a curved screen, and it looks stunning in my opinion. But let's look beyond that flashy screen just for a second, because it's also got some performance chops to back up its sky-high price. The pump being used here is the ASUS Gen 8 V2, and it's being paired with a 30mm thick radiator. To take advantage of that additional thermal mass, TRYX is using their flagship Rota SL Pro fans, which are optimized for static pressure, so technically a perfect match for that chunkier rad. And they also come with a magnetic mounting system that virtually eliminates all of the cable clutter. But the real star of the show here is that curved screen. It uses a 6.5-inch 2K 60Hz AMOLED that can get almost unbelievably bright, and the things you can do with it are just, well, really next level. And look, there's no doubt the Panorama is expensive, but there's also a less expensive Panorama SE, which has a rotatable display. However, it uses a different pump, removes the VRM fan, has a thinner radiator, and uses slightly detuned fans too. So if you want the looks and figure the standard version would be sort of overkill for your CPU when it comes to cooling, then this could be a good fit. And last but not least, we've got the Thermalright Frozen Edge. And look, I know there's a metric ton of Thermalright liquid coolers out there, but there's a reason why I chose this specific one. First of all, its average price is just 60 bucks and routinely goes for less than that. A lot of the reason behind that low price, well, other than it being part of Thermalright's DNA these days, is its basic design. Instead, all the cost of this cooler is put towards performance. There's a custom high-flow 3300 RPM pump housed in a low-profile head unit, and yet it's the fans that make this thing completely unique. Until very recently, the TLB12 was Thermalright's flagship fan, and it had a very specific goal: to compete against the Noctua NF-A12's airflow, static pressure, and noise output by using a custom SFDB bearing, quiet running motor, and a uniquely pitched blade design. Meanwhile, Thermalright is offering an entire 360mm AIO for less than what 3 of those Noctua fans cost. And the next thing I need to talk about is, of course, installation. Now, if you've seen any of our roundups in the past, you'll know this is where I usually go on a multi-minute rant, right? But not this time. This time, most of these coolers had no specific problems whatsoever. But I did want to call out a few little hiccups and also some areas that I really saw some things that were unique. Like TRYX, they've got this cool notched mounting bracket that allows for micro adjustments to its location without the need to replace the bracket itself. That means it can be slightly offset for optimal mounting pressure on AMD and the latest generation Intel CPUs, which have their hotspots slightly off center. I also have to give some credit to Cooler Master for integrating their instruction manual directly onto their accessory kit packaging. It's brilliant, even though it's a bit hard to read. Arctic also needs a little bit of a call out here. They do give their AMD brackets an automatic offset, and for Intel, you'll need to completely remove the stock socket retention bracket or ILM. It's a pretty straightforward process, but not one that's particularly beginner friendly, especially when you consider Arctic's instructions are only available online once you scan a QR code. I also absolutely hate the fact that the Endorfy cooler still needs a SATA power cable. I mean, what is this, 2005? Another major pain point used to be just setting up RGB on these things, but now luckily the vast majority of manufacturers, yes, including Corsair, have taken a step back and are no longer pigeonholing you into using their first-party software. So the RGB experience on these things will ultimately be as good or bad as your RGB software of choice sort of like allows it to be. But there are Two exceptions here. One of them is ROG and the other one is TRYX. So to control the Ryujin 3 screen, it becomes painfully obvious that Armoury Crate is simply being asked to do way too much and very few things go according to plan. I mean, sure, getting a static image uploaded to the screen is easy, but anything else, get ready to pull your freaking hair out. There's an integrated option to download animated GIFs from GIPHY, but it takes, and I'm not kidding you guys, 4 minutes to process a single 50 kilobyte GIF. Want to upload a looped video or something like that? Well, good luck. First of all, the maximum file size is 64 megabytes, which isn't advertised anywhere in the software up until it errors out. And then you go to upload something smaller than that, let's say 50 megs, you'll get 2 minutes of radio silence followed by, guess what? A message saying that your file is too large. And look, we even tried a highly optimized, low resolution, 2 megabyte MP4 on the Ryujin 3. And guess how long that took to process? Wait for it. 10 minutes. The entire experience controlling the #1 feature on this AIO is a complete and utter mess. And maybe somewhere out there, maybe on Reddit, some thread that we haven't seen before, you can sort of find a way to make this whole process faster. But it's not indicated in any ASUS documentation. It is not indicated within the software or anywhere else that we could find. So to me, this whole experience, something that you're paying so much money for, is a complete failure. On the other hand, TRYX's approach to display control feels like a quantum leap forward when compared to that hot ROG mess. Their interface is fluid and snappy, and uploading images, GIFs, and even larger videos happens in a fraction of the time. It's nearly instantaneous in most cases, where the ROG took minutes, this thing took seconds. Meanwhile, the update time to the display itself is lightning quick. But was it completely flawless? Unfortunately, no. We had some crashes and a few situations where the display refused to update until we connected it to a different internal USB port. Okay, and with all of that out of the way, I think it's time to get into a little bit of testing. And to set a baseline before we get into all the temperature results, I want to talk about a couple things to do with the pump noise and the fan noise on these coolers. And to be honest with you, most of these coolers have pumps that run well under our noise floor of 31.3 decibels, even when running at full speed. But 6 of them did have very evident noise profiles, and of those, 4 of them fall into the exact same category. They're running Asetek pumps. So while the Asetek Gen 8 series might have some very impressive performance numbers, it also makes quite a bit more noise than some competing solutions. There's also a huge variance when it comes to actual fan speeds, ranging from just about 1800 RPM all the way up to Arctic's 3000 RPM. Just a small thing to note here though, we're doing actual rotational measurements with a laser tachometer, so the numbers you see here might be different from the manufacturer's specifications. Overlaying noise on top of that shows a very different perspective, since some of the low speed fans actually translate into very noisy coolers. Perfect examples of this are the FX360 Pro and Phanteks Glacier 1. When running at full speed, both are almost unbelievably loud given how slow they're actually spinning. On the other end of the spectrum, we have the Atmos Stealth, which runs all the way to 2400 RPM but tops out at just 42 decibels. The Liquid Freezer 3 Pro is another interesting one. Yes, it's the loudest, but its fans are also spinning at an insane rate. To put this into perspective, it's running 13% faster than the Ryujin, but it's less than a single decibel louder, which points towards these being some very good fans. So that's where things stand from a numbers perspective for all of these coolers, but I also wanted to get into our testing methodology a little bit, because we went very deep in order to account for almost every single eventuality. So all the results you'll see in the testing are the average temperatures of 3 different mounts. Also, between every single run, the fans and pump were run at full speed for 30 minutes in order to bring the internal liquid to a nominal temperature before the next test started. The full load and gaming load tests were done for a duration of 30 minutes each. Meanwhile, the thermal compound we're using is ID Cooling's Frost X45 for a number of reasons. Its temperatures were good, it's ultra easy to apply and clean up, and more importantly for us, its numbers were super stable from one application and mount to the next. And that's so critical when testing across multiple mounts like we are. As for the charts, here the y-axis is showing CPU temperature in degrees Celsius, while the x-axis shows how noisy each cooler gets in decibels. This highlights how hot the CPU gets relative to the amount of noise the coolers produce. So the best coolers here will have the lowest temperatures at the lowest possible noise levels. And sure, other AIOs might get lower overall temperatures, but they need to get a whole lot louder to get there. So the last thing you'd want to see here are lines that are high and also long. That would mean a cooler gets loud, but it also stays hot. All right, let's get things started with the 9800X3D results under a full core workload. And there's a cluster of coolers that are generally better than everything else here. The Ryujin 3 Extreme, Atmos Stealth, and Corsair Nautilus all get under 70 degrees, and the Nautilus actually starts pulling ahead at higher decibels. But the real winners here, especially at lower noise levels, are the TRYX Panorama and Lian GA2 performance. The Panorama does fall behind a bit, but honestly, for about $100, that GA2 is just running away with things. There's also a bunch of coolers that sit comfortably in the middle of the pack. Those include the ID Coolings, which get very similar results to one another, the ASUS Prime, and Montech HyperFlow. You can sort of add the F360 to that list, but it puts down some very, very good numbers in the lower noise ranges, which is exactly what Endorfy promised it would do. There's also a few minor disappointments too, with the Phanteks delivering back of the pack results, likely because it's so loud relative to the amount of cooling it actually delivers. So it'll struggle in decibel normalized tests like these. Thermalright unfortunately is here too, but it's very competitive when running quietly, and its price of $50 is literally half of what some other coolers go for. But the biggest slip up, surprise, surprise, well, that award goes to Arctic. I'm not sure what in the world happened here, because the original Liquid Freezer 3 was one of the best options for Ryzen 7000 series chips. But here with the 9800X3D, it was consistently 2 to 3 degrees worse than the M25 G2 and Frozen Edge. And I know some of you're looking at those Liquid Freezer 3 Pro numbers and you're saying there's absolutely no way that this is happening. You guys got a defective cooler or something else. But we gave Arctic the benefit of the doubt. We requested another sample from them. So that made 2 samples that we tested. Not only that, we actually bought another one ourselves, and they all performed identically to one another within like 0.2 degrees. So there's obviously something else going on here. But we also have to look at this realistically, because when normalized down to our lowest noise envelope, every one of these coolers are able to get the 9800X3D to below 77 degrees. That's miles away from its 105 degree maximum, and there's only about 8 degrees separating the absolute best from the worst coolers here. Meanwhile, at 40 decibels, things do tighten up even more, with most coolers hitting around the 70 degree mark. At this level, with 8 coolers being within 1.5 degrees of each other, the standings you see here are largely falling into a margin of error. And if you thought the full core workload was tight, well, gaming has every cooler here within 1.5 degrees of one another, despite them all munching down on the GPU's heat. The only exception is the Lian, which extends its lead here, especially between 32 and 34 decibels. There are a few other callouts here too, with the Corsair Nautilus and Cooler Master Stealth getting consistently better numbers than all the other coolers right across their entire noise ranges. But they're particularly good at delivering the best performance at ultra quiet fan speeds. Those are followed by the usual suspects, with the TRYX and Ryujin 3 Extreme getting similar results, though this time the Montech HyperFlow Silent matches both of those at 33 decibels and below. Meanwhile, the FX360 series and Endorfy are effectively tied, while the Frozen Edge and Phanteks struggle just a bit when running at quieter fan speeds, but they do pick things up slightly at higher decibel ranges. The ASUS LC360 does the exact opposite. It's very good down low, but takes a bit of a back seat above 36 decibels. And probably the best news here is the Freezer 3 Pro being not the absolute worst cooler in this whole roundup like it was during the full core workload. Instead, it's right in the middle of things. No better and no worse than the other coolers here. But I cannot emphasize this enough. We're splitting hairs here, guys. Even at 32 decibels, which is the most challenging noise level in our testing, there's less than 3 degrees separating every one of these 13 coolers, and all of them, and I mean all of them, are running the X3D at under 54 degrees Celsius. At that point, it doesn't matter what you choose. a $350 TRYX, or a $50 Thermalright. If your system is focused on gaming, any one of these coolers is absolutely more than enough, and they all get what amounts to identical thermal performance. Moving on to the Intel 285K, and in general, we're seeing a good 2 to 4 degree jump in temperatures when compared to the 9800X3D. There's also a bit of, I guess you would call it, a reordering of the ranking, with the Lian going from class leading on AM5 to a solid upper mid-tier finish here, though it's beaten by the Nautilus and Cooler Master Atmos under 36 degrees. Meanwhile, the two FX360s, Glacier 1, Prime LC360, HyperFlow, and Frozen Edge all get effectively identical results, though the Thermalright cooler does start falling behind a bit as noise increases. The Liquid Freezer 3 Pro has a bit of a redemption arc here too, by becoming one of the top 5 360mm AIOs at low noise levels, and then becoming one of the best when running over 36 decibels. But ultimately, the two most expensive liquid coolers here run away with the Intel cooling crown. The Ryujin 3 Extreme and TRYX Panorama are a solid 2 degrees cooler down low than the Atmos Stealth and Arctic, but the gap does start narrowing as the noise levels go up. Now, you might have thought an Intel processor running at over 250 watts would have caused a bit more temperature separation than the 9800X3D did when normalized down to 32 decibels, but that simply didn't happen. Instead, there's just a 5 degree delta between the Panorama and LC360, and that presents an interesting question, I think. Every cooler here sits under 75 degrees at 32 decibels, so why would you want to go above that noise level in the first place? Because even at a relatively loud 40 decibels, most coolers here are getting at most 2 degrees lower temperatures than they did when running much quieter. One of the reasons we aren't seeing much of an improvement is that we're approaching a thermal bottleneck on the chip itself, coupled with the inherent limits of these coolers. So to get lower temperatures than this, you'd probably need more exotic methods like a TEC or a massively optimized Intel contact plate. Gaming results on the Intel platform pretty much follow the exact same path as the AMD ones did. Basically, all the coolers get a lot closer to one another, and most of them are getting almost identical performance. Again though, there are some that really do tend to stand out. While the TRYX, Atmos Stealth, and Corsair Nautilus are still ahead, the Ryujin is now a middle of the pack performer, essentially tying the two ID cooling products, the Arctic, HyperFlow Silent, Endorfy, Lian, and Phanteks. And just like in the full load testing, the ASUS and Thermalright are a bit further behind. But because of how close all of these are to one another, even on this Intel system, it's almost impossible to point to a single option and recommend it over the others. At least not from a raw performance standpoint. I mean, sure, you can look at the Panorama as being the leader at the lowest noise levels, which is an amazing achievement for TRYX's first ever CPU cooler. But otherwise, there's nothing really unique here. So on the surface of things, it looks like every single one of these CPU coolers is operating at like peak efficiency. But I also wanted to see what would happen if we level the playing field here and normalize fan testing. And for that, of course, we used the legendary Phanteks T30 fans. At 32 decibels, there's really some interesting things going on here, with the T30s not making much of a difference on a lot of these coolers. Some, like the Glacier 1 Prime and FX360 INF, see temperature drops of over a degree, but the vast majority hardly see any impact whatsoever. As a matter of fact, the Lian, ROG, and TRYX actually saw a temperature increase, which points towards their stock fans being superior to the T30s, at least at this specific decibel level. Remember though, many companies claim they've customized their fan design for optimal performance on their chosen radiators. To me, these numbers tend to back that up, at least when running in quieter noise bands. And yet the move to higher decibel levels really allows the T30 to flex its muscles a bit more, with the only coolers not seeing a pretty big impact being the ROG, Montech, and Arctic. Actually, this result means the Liquid Freezer 3 Pro's fans aren't the culprit for its poor performance on the 9800X3D. But if you want to invest in flagship fans that could double the price of your AIO for a few degrees less and absolutely no tangible performance benefit while ditching the RGB fans you paid for in the first place, well, the Nautilus, Glacier 1, Prime, and FX360 INF all see a drop of 2 degrees or more. All right, so with all that behind us, my God, it's been a journey, right? It's time to crown some winners and losers, but I'll be straightforward with you here, guys. We can't just do that based off of the performance numbers that you see, because if you look at it, every single one of these coolers is literal overkill for the CPUs. even in gaming. Something else our results showed is the law of diminishing returns between high noise levels and temperatures. All of these 360mm AIOs excel in delivering great temperatures while running whisper quiet, and there are virtually no benefits whatsoever from increasing fan speeds past a certain point. And you know what? That is perfectly fine. It's exactly what we want. Silent operation is like the holy grail of any CPU cooler. So in a lot of ways, I can't really say that there's any real winners or losers here. There's sort of various tiers of great to good. But from a raw numbers standpoint, the GA2 Lite performance jumps out right away. It got amazing results on AMD and did very well on Intel too, all while costing about $100. Normally, I wouldn't hesitate to recommend it since it's like the full package, a straightforward installation, understated good looks, you name it. And yet, and this is a big deal guys, Lian Li's history of pump issues does have me sort of like pumping the brakes a little bit on recommending the GA2 Lite performance. And look, this is a new generation of pump, it's a new generation of cooler for them, so maybe they've taken all those issues and sort of like pushed it aside. Maybe this one's going to be great, but we just don't have the history right now to back that up. But I do have one recommendation here. Drumroll please. Which is the cooler that wins this all? Well, it's the Corsair Nautilus RS. It consistently placed in the top 3 at the lowest noise levels. The non-RGB version can be found for under $100 when it's on sale. Installation was a breeze provided you're okay using an online manual. And if things do go wrong, Corsair is known for having one of the better customer service experiences out there. On the flip side of that coin, the true budget coolers, Thermalright, ID Cooling, Montech, also did remarkably well. But if money is no issue, well, the TRYX Panorama is probably what you should be looking at. Unlike so many other coolers that put bling before performance, this one does a combination of both of those things. It proved to have the performance chops to back up its pretty looks with top tier numbers on both platforms. I just cannot emphasize again how impressive this is for TRYX, right? This is their first AIO and they are beating all of the top dogs when it comes to overall performance while looking like it's right here. It looks stunning, right? Yes, there are a few software hiccups here and there, but that's almost like par for the course these days. On the other hand, speaking of software, we have to talk about ROG because their $350 cooler requires Armory Crate as a jump off point for every one of its main features, and it ends up feeling like a clunky mess and certainly not premium at all. Another disappointment on the AMD platform at least is the Liquid Freezer 3 Pro with just shockingly subpar results. And to be perfectly transparent with you, we're working behind the scenes right now with the team at Arctic to see if we can get to the bottom of this whole affair with the Liquid Freezer 3 Pro. And I'm hoping to have an update video for you relatively soon about that. But until that point, this concludes one of our most extensive roundups ever, I think. And it's going to lay the foundation for upcoming AIO reviews in the next couple of months. And I'm so excited to show you some of the interesting AIOs that we're getting in for those. And also, we're going to be evolving our testing yet again in some of those videos with higher wattage CPUs, which just couldn't unfortunately fit in this video. But until that point, I'm Mike with Hardware Canucks. I hope you enjoyed this extensive video and I will see you in the next one. Have a great day, guys.